Recording now. My keys. That's a good way to start this episode off. YouTube's already gonna hate my guts. 5 seconds in, I'm already dropping an F-bomb.
Okay.
Spotify must love me.
Okay, well, I guess it kind of helps considering the subject matter technically starts with F. Is that a good segue? Like, does that track?
Yeah, sure. I just added a couple more letters to the fairies.
Yeah, that's all that happened.
Okay. Well, welcome to Mythical Monster Investigations. I think episode 26. I'm not gonna lie, I've kind of lost count with
Yes,
the
26.
angel ones as well. Okay. We're going to be taking a look at fairies, elves, and goblins. And Shadow R. Fox, thank you for resisting the urge to suddenly shout, "Oh my," and show a picture of Dorothy. Now, as people who are familiar with this podcast are generally get a formula. We put down a monster and then we talk about it. However, in this case, we're talking about 3 different creatures. And in fact, we'll be talking about more than that. So the question becomes, why are we kind of lumping them all together in the same section? I mean, they're all supposed to have different looks, different origins, and different powers, right? Well, honestly, that's more of a modern media interpretation. In fact, the original myths and stories about these creatures do not make as much of a distinction as modern media does today. Now, modern media being mostly Hollywood books and stories, and it's done mostly for entertainment purposes. So in order to kind of dig into the origins of these creatures and to see that their similarities far outshine their differences, we need to first figure out what exactly separates them and what exactly is the media's influence for entertainment. And to get to that, let's start with the most popular of the 3, and that would be the elves. Now, the modern image of the elf is as a tall, handsome, fair, humanoid creature with the iconic pointy ears, and they're one with nature, they're strong, they're fair, all close to being angelic beings, if anything. And with little difference in appearance to humans, and also great warriors, and they're supposed to be great in hand-to-hand combat. Now, oddly enough, the pointed ears are not. This mostly comes from J.R.R. Tolkien. J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, of course, is what most people think of when they see elves in their mind. And the pointed ears are the most distinctive feature. But oddly enough, in Tolkien's stories of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit, he doesn't actually state that elves have pointed ears. That actually comes from The Hobbit and its description of the hobbits. He describes the hobbits as having pointed ears and mentions that the hobbits' ears were defiantly elf-like. And that's where the kind of pointed ears of the elves comes from. So it's mostly hobbits. In fact, in most traditions, pointed ears, especially when you go further back in ancient times, they were associated with demonic images. Devils, demons, and foul creatures were the ones who had these kind of distorted pointed ears, which makes sense because, in medieval demonic times, anything that was kind of out of ordinary or pointy, anything that was a little off was considered demonic. Just look at the many tests for witches. If you had a mole, you were probably a witch. Well done on that. But so how did the pointy ears become part of the elves? Well, believe it or not, there was some precedent to this, which J.R.R. Tolkien took from, but it's actually fairly recent in that it came around the 19th century, particularly the Victorian era. Artists and portraitures for paintings and other various forms of media would paint elves, sprites, and any kind of wooden creatures with pointed ears. Now, the reason they did this was actually to distinguish them from the humans, since all of them were trying to make great works of art. And this time period especially, you were supposed to make beautiful works of art, so everybody needed to look pretty and, very fair. They needed a way to kind of distinguish the humans from the elves and other magical creatures, so they started giving them pointed ears, and that's mostly where it came from. It was literally just an artistic way to distinguish them from humans. And now, in spite of the hopes and wishes of the Dungeons and Dragons community, the whole elves were usually not described with these types of features. Going back, elves were not supposed to be these tall, impressive humanoids, and definitely not supposed to be the, Legolas of Lord of the Rings. Now, while elves could be proud, they were definitely not warriors. They were, however, magical, but the earliest stories that described elves actually described very tiny creatures that were often barely a foot tall and some only a few inches tall.
So what I'm
Which,
hearing is those old school Santa Claus stop motions had the elves right.
Actually, yeah, no, they had them pretty close because
So,
they were supposed to be short. And actually, that leads it into one of the earliest tellings, the elves and the shoemaker, who, what were they? They were very small, who happened to make shoes. Santa having elves that made toys. I mean, it's not that far off. Actually, I wonder if that's why Santa has elves.
So what I'm hearing is Santa's real. Because he had the most low accurate version of elves. So, ergo, Santa's real.
Okay, Zed, I need help because I can continue this conversation, but I feel my continuation is only going to argument.
Uh-huh.
So what do I do here?
Good luck.
Damn.
Hell,
Well,
Santa.
To be fair, Santa is actually based on a real person. He was real. He was a bishop in Constantinople, actually. And
Saint Nicholas.
Yeah, Saint Nicholas. And I guess you could make an argument that his body was never... Okay, why am I helping you with this? Where was I going with this?
I
don't know.
I can now mark this episode as child friendly because we're proving the existence of Santa via elves.
You started this episode with an F-bomb.
That doesn't mean anything nowadays.
You know what? That's true. I wouldn't be surprised if kids hear that.
Childhood wonder by establishing that Santa is real because he had the most low accurate version of elves.
Okay, I'm having trouble arguing with this. Like, that's legitimately a good point. In fact, I'm genuinely wondering now if, like, did the elves for Santa Claus come because of this story? Because, like, the elves were added later on from the Santa Claus. You know what? I'm not exploring this. Maybe another video will take a look at where Santa Claus got his elves.
I'll write that down for what we do for the Christmas podcast. We need to explore the elves, Rudolph, Frosty. We gotta bring them all in and just figure out. Okay, so all these Bigfoot's fake, but Rudolph's totally real.
Oh God, we're gonna end up making so many kids cry. Anyway, going on. So, what we do find when we look at original stories about elves, who, yes, were in fact short, not proud warriors, but these small creatures, is they were often side characters where they could either help or hinder the main character or the protagonist depending on the narrative that they were in. For instance, Elves and the Shoemaker. The elves were helpful side characters who helped a tired old man who showed them some kindness build his shoes, and he in turn showed them kindness too. Most people know the story of at least seeing the cartoon. The old man was nice to them. They helped him out, and they in turn also got some help as he made them little clothes in some versions. So it's a very nice story. It's a cute story. It's for kids. It's not intentionally that interesting. It's the moral simple, be kind, be helpful, good things will come to you. Obviously, though, this version of Elves would not have been a good match for Lord of the Rings. As while Lord of the Rings does have the main heroes being hobbits who were literally like 4 feet tall or something, it would have been very difficult to make these creatures who, at sometimes were about an inch tall, be great warriors that defeated Uruk-hai and powerful wizards. So you can see why J.R.R. Tolkien probably went for a more tall, graceful warrior elf rather than the small, helpful little elves we typically got in stories before J.R.R. Tolkien really influenced them into what they are today. So that comes at it. So instead of the warrior, you get the small helpers. And that actually can be seen in Tolkien's other works because Tolkien had a big effect on the fantasy genre. Like, you'd be surprised just how much Tolkien's story really just shaped modern day fantasy. And that can be seen in many aspects, another of which, other than the elves, was also the monstrous goblins. Now, goblins, I can't really say that their appearance has been altered much by Tolkien's overall depiction of them, as not because his depiction was just so spot on, because in reality they've never actually been very accurately physically described. Now, these mostly change per culture, but generally they're described as grotesque tiny creatures, which, I mean, it depends on what you mean by grotesque. People's definition of grotesque can be very different, especially nowadays. So, but basically, they were just ugly little creatures. That's the most you got out of it. However, the exaggeration with goblins, especially with J.R.R. Tolkien, was not had nothing to do with their appearance, but more of all, their exaggeration came in their intent, particularly their evil intent. Goblins were described as mostly just mischievous, not particularly good or evil, and definitely not monsters that were trying to eat everybody or destroy everything in their path like they're depicted in Lord of the Rings. They would cause trouble. A little bit of why is the Green Goblin on there?
I had to get the most famous goblin up in here.
He's not even a goblin. He's a guy in a suit. I mean, what about the Hobgoblin? Why am I helping you with this? Again, they're guys in suits.
Would the Hobgoblin be more accurate?
Neither one of them are lore accurate. They're guys in suits in their own world. How do they have anything to do with goblins? Like, it would have been more accurate to post goblins from the Hobbit movie. Actually, I'm trying to think. Are there movies with goblins other than The Hobbit? There has to be, right?
There's a couple of horror films I recall where there's goblins in it. Where the goblins are the monsters.
I'm not a big horror person, but yeah, I would imagine. But oh wait, wasn't that Goblins movie, that awful one with that was voted one of the worst movies ever or something?
I think so.
I never saw that. Well, anyway, back to these goblins. So they, like I said, they cause trouble, very little farm, but once again, we see that they're mostly side characters. They're meant to be an obstacle for our protagonist to get over, but they're never actually considered an overwhelming threat, or at least very, very rarely. In fact, in original stories, they were more of an inconvenient nuisance. In fact, if anything, they were there just to kind of pad the story, give the hero one more hurdle to leap over so that they kind of fill in the plot a bit more and didn't automatically save the princess or save the kingdom or, find the golden crown or whatever it was they were doing. So that's the influence of Goblin. And I know it seems like I'm kind of rushing these, but I've got to point to all three of these that's going to become clear very soon. And especially when we look at the final monster or the final creature we described in this, and that's the fairies and the influence modern day media has had on them. because Hollywood and Disney's influence, Disney in particular, has made fairies these good, positive, magical helpers with wings that are pure and just very graceful little things, where they've made an entire franchise about this that I didn't even know. Like, really, how many of the Tinkerbell movies did they make? Like,
I know at least 2 of them.
More than they needed to.
well, one was more than they needed to.
I think they
But
made 4 of them. I think that I can think of off the top of my head.
how do you make 4 movies about Tinkerbell? Honestly, like, she doesn't even talk.
Let's find out how many Tinkerbells.
Wait, does she talk in
my
the movies?
shoot!
In those movies,
Tinkerbell,
yes.
Tinkerbell 2008, Tinkerbell and the Lost Treasure 2009, Tinkerbell and the Great Fairy Rescue 2010, the Pixie Hollow Games 2011, Secret of the Wings 2012, The Pirate Fairy 2014, and
There are pirate fairies?
and the Tinkerbell and the Legend of the Never Beast 2014.
So,
what?
7 films.
Are there 7?
Yes.
Okay.
There's
Apparently,
7
I accidentally counted.
7. God, they're almost as bad as the Fast and Furious movies.
Oh wait, and
Oh,
they
God,
got unreleased film, Tinker Academy, Tink Mink Peter.
Oh God, it's Fast and Furious for girls.
Oh wow, so the Pixie Hollow Games are literally the Pixie Olympics.
They're for fracks. Okay, so as you can see, Disney in particular has turned has given fairies a very particular image, to where if you say fairy, most people are going to think of Tinkerbell. I mean, I think that's just the general, like, in the United States, I would think if you said fairy, most people would think of in some way or form of Tinkerbell. I mean, honestly, I don't imagine another type of fairy that comes to mind. Like, if I say fairy, is there anything else that comes to you guys' mind?
Well, I do think of the Celtic fairies, and that's probably only because of that new Doctor Who, where they did that whole episode with the fairies trapping them. And I was like, wow, that's actually a slightly low accurate fairy of them tricking people and trapping them.
Actually, wasn't a bad episode.
Yeah, no, that was like one of the only good episodes. I think that's where I stopped.
Yeah, mostly because the Doctor wasn't in it. Yeah, let's not get me on another Doctor Who rant.
No, I'm trying to think of fairy. Oh, I think of the Fairly Odd Parents.
Actually, I'm surprised you haven't thrown them up yet.
I couldn't find a good picture of them.
Really?
I was having a hard time finding them. Oh well, hang on, let me see.
With all the media on them, really?
I was having to find a big one that was just them, or with nothing in the background or something like that.
Got it. Okay, that might be a bit more difficult. Oh well. Anyway, so bottom line, Disney and Hollywood has given fairies a very defined image, and while it is true that most of the early mythos does have fairies being fairly helpful, no mythos actually states that they're specifically good. In fact, most fairies seem to have a fondness for mischief. You know, they like causing a little bit of trouble, but not in a malicious way, more like a bratty kid playing pranks. Or not even a bratty kid, just a kid who liked to play pranks. You know, they, again, could be helpful or hindering depending on the story. Which, here is where we can see kind of an emerging pattern between these creatures. Between these creatures, and that is their kind of helpful or hindrance attitude. Now, fairies, when it comes to their legends, fairies are European, which I realize that's kind of generic, but it is very true, as they are present in German, English, Slavic, French, and other various cultures and mythologies. And you see, the real problem with discovery and the fairies' origin, the biggest issue, is how often the term fairy is used. And what I mean by that is kind of think of the way guy is used. We've all used the term guy to describe any type of man. And that's the thing. We use it for that instead of describing what it originally was. The term guy, which not a lot of people know, actually comes from a man named Guy Fawkes. Guy Fawkes was actually a dangerous British revolutionary who tried to blow up Parliament. He was caught and stopped before Parliament could be destroyed, and he was executed. So, on Guy Fawkes Day, which is still a national holiday, if you've ever heard British people saying, remember the 5th of November?
Didn't he try to blow up
Parliament?
Yeah, and
remember the 5th of November. That was Guy Fawkes.
Wasn't he brutally tortured and executed for that in a very horrible way?
Yes, and because of that, that's where they used the term. That's where the term "guy" came from. Was actually from that, where originally it was kind of a slur. Later on, became basically meaning any type of guy. So its overuse kind of diluted its original meaning, and now it's just become a umbrella term for male. And believe it or not, believe it or not, fairy actually has the same issue, as it was used to describe any magical entity, including goblins and gnomes. Any small magical creature was basically just called a fairy. So it was a blanket cover for whatever it was, especially if you didn't actually know exactly what it was. So, what are the differences in these creatures when it comes to the mythos? Well, believe it or not, there's not a lot of them, especially when it comes to physical attributes, not because they don't have any physical differences, because there's not a lot of differences. There's not a lot of physical traits actually described when it comes to any of these creatures. For instance, we have the things in common, which are small, magical. They're prone to mischief. They're typically side characters. They're neither good nor evil, and they can often switch from harmful to helpful depending on how the narrative needs them to be. However, the physical description is often misleading because early narratives described the creatures for the audience, not the protagonist. Now, what do I mean by that? Is that when a lot of narratives described these creatures, they gave a description of the characters, but they did it for the audience who was listening. In the story itself, the protagonist rarely ever sees the creature, as usually the work is done unseen. In fact, some stories even claim that the creatures are invisible. So it's rare that these creatures are ever seen by the protagonist. And I want that to keep a note because it may come into play on what exactly their origin is. Now, fairies, they have a very interesting grasp on our society. In fact, there are many societies around to this day that are still trying to discover and actually find what fairies could be. And, well, that led to one of the more embarrassing notes of fairies being real, and that is the explanation of the Cottingley fairies. And the Cottingley fairies, I'm not going to lie, is one of the famous cases of fairies could be real, if not the most famous one. And it all started when these little girls, two cousins, by the name of Elise Wright and Frances Griffins, claimed that they had found a magical fairy world. And because, you got to have proof of this, they brought back photos, which if you're watching on YouTube, that is one of the different photos they brought back to prove that they'd had actually come into contact with this fairy world and that all their stories were true. It was a huge media sensation. So many people interviewed these girls, so many people looked after them, so many people wanted to see this, and it was published everywhere. And as you can probably figure out, it was 100% BS. In fact, one of the girls years later, after she became an old woman, actually came forward and say, yeah, no, this was bullshit. So why does this annoy me? Personally, this annoys me for one very simple reason, and that's because I am a huge Sherlock Holmes fan, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the writer of Sherlock Holmes, examined the pictures like the one you see on screen right now and claimed that this was real. Said it wasn't doctored, it was real. And I'm just going, come on. I mean, Shadow R Fox, do me a favor, go back to the picture.
Yeah.
To the original picture for a second. And just, like, really look at, do you in any way think that's real? Do you, I mean, you see the problem, right?
Like, I'm trying to think, when I first saw this image, the first thing and this is like when I first saw it, not like today, but originally, years back. I'm like, okay, I can see how this fooled people because maybe they didn't. Because I'm like, looking at it, I gotta admit, whoever did the cardboard cutout for the fairies did a good job.
No, they did a good job, but they still look flat.
No, they look flat. But I'm like, okay, well, you know what? This is people back during the black and white days. They're dumber back then. I mean, we got people who still can't tell different between AI pictures. So I'm like, okay, yeah, you know what? This checks out.
I guess, but come on.
But didn't the photographer come out and say it was fake?
I don't actually know. I thought the girls took the pictures.
Was it because I remember whoever took the picture said, yeah, no, it's totally fake.
Now, the girl I know eventually came out and admitted that it was all a hoax. I thought that one of the girls took the pictures. Was there a photographer or that I didn't know?
Because I thought
I'm not gonna lie, I kind of read the Sir Arthur Conan Doyle part, and it pissed me off so much that I was just like, come on, bro. My only consolation is that to remember Sir Arthur Conan Doyle based Sherlock Holmes off of his medical teacher, Dr. Joseph Bell. I'm always having this picture of Dr. Joseph Bell looking at this, going to Arthur Conan Doyle, shaking his head, going, you really were fooled by this? Come on, Doyle, use your head. I guess to be fair to Arthur Conan Doyle, this point in his life where he was very big into spiritualism because of the loss of his wife. So maybe you could argue he wanted to believe more. But still, I mean, come on. Look at this. Zed.
Okay, yeah, it was the girls who took the picture.
Yeah.
Looking at that picture, even if it was a little blurrier, did those pictures look in any way? They look flat, right? They have no definition to them.
The original version I saw when you posted it to Discord, I could very clearly tell it looked like someone laid them down and then put the picture on top of it to make one full picture.
Right?
Like they cut the fairies out of something.
Yeah, they look
Seeing it
flat.
smaller here, it's more convincing, but the fairies are far too light for everything else that's in the picture.
Yes. And maybe this is just like my more artistic eyes, but
and here's another
there's
picture.
no depth to them. They look flat. Even here,
that looks more
flat.
fake than the small one that I saw just before.
Yeah.
Yes, they look flat.
Because they are far too bright. And because of that, they are far too flat.
And the other pictures are just as bad. All the fairies look flat. They look like cardboard cutouts. And that is what they are. They're cardboard cutouts from magazines.
But for the black and white one, I would say that's the one that, in my opinion, if I was to just look at it and not actually look at, like, a glance at it, that's the one where I'm like, okay, I can see how they could trick some people initially. Like, if I don't stare at it intently and I just glance at it, I'm like, because you gotta admit, if you just passing glance that picture, I can see, because it almost looked like the quality of the Who Framed Roger Rabbit with 2D characters next to a 3D character.
Yeah, but you didn't think that the characters still looked real.
No, but I know a lot of people who want Jessica Rabbit to be real, so...
Okay, let's not get into that issue. Okay, there's that whole weird thing about the Jessica Rabbit, because that's going to send us down a very strange hole, and then we're gonna make jokes about Jessica Rabbit and the crotch shot, and it's like, you know what? We don't need to get into it.
I never saw that as a kid.
The crotch shot or the movie?
The crotch shot. I never found out about that till like I was a grown adult. Who I'm like, wait, what are you guys talking about?
I'm not gonna lie. When I was in school, that's all they freaking talked about when that movie first came out. And like, that's actually how because my comment was, "What? Isn't she hot?" Because my comment was, "She's a cartoon." What do you mean she's hot? She's a cartoon. She's literally lines on paper.
I never knew about that. Like, I never knew about that.
Like, I legit didn't care. And like, some people's like, oh, he's just trying to. No, I really didn't care because, again, to me, it's a cartoon.
Well,
like
what I was getting at was the Who Framed Roger Rabbit. The way, say what you will about how they did the effects. What I was trying to get at was you kind of do get a little bit sense of, okay, they're trying their best to make it seem like there's 2D characters in our 3-dimensional world. You know.
Yeah. No.
You can see, you can sometimes see where the actors are just talking to themselves, but they, it does look a little bit more believable in the final product. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay,
No. 100%.
this picture, black and white. If I'm just glancing at it, if I just look at it and then glance away, I would go, wait, what was that just now?
Yeah, it's not bad, but that's the thing. That's my problem, especially by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Is this picture was examined.
Yeah.
As a problem, it's set up very nicely, but the fairies still lack depth. That's my problem. Is looking at them, no matter what version you see, they lack depth. They look flat. They look like cutouts.
The fact that 2 little orphan girls did this is what I found more impressive, because that's actually look like this do look like a professional photo, in my opinion.
Okay, fair enough. Photography and all that, but still.
Well, for 2 girls to do this back then, when was this taken? Like 1910 or something? When was this?
I don't actually know. It had to be when Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was alive, but so either early 1900s or late 1800s. That's actually a good question.
So the girls, this would 1917.
1917.
So for
okay.
something taken back during 1917, those by 2 young orphan, I think they were 2 young. Were they orphans? No, were they just cousins?
They were
2
cousins.
cousins. Yeah, 2 cousins. That's good for 5 photographs taken by these girls. Yeah, that's pretty good.
No, I'm not challenging the photographs themselves. I'm challenging that anybody thought the sprites were real because they look so flat.
Now, when you start looking at some of the other, granted, this one is the most believable. When you start looking at some of the other ones, oh, it's so obvious they're flat.
It's very obvious. That's my problem. Is that look at all of them together, they look flat.
Yes.
And that's my issue. So
I would say this one right here is the one where they look the least flat.
Yes.
Compared to all the others.
Flat.
Because they took 5 of these, and this is the one that looked the best. And I'm like, okay, I can see how this one got people to say there's fairies. If they only saw this one and none of the other 5.
Yeah, but again, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle examined these photos, all of them. So that's why, to me, it's a little bit shameful. It's and come on, people.
I could see him going, well, you know what? They're flat because they're fairies, they're magical, and that's how they project themselves on films.
Okay, moving on. All right, and with that disappointment to my childhood and to one of my favorite, to the authors of overall my favorite fictional character, I think now is to have a good time for a lighter note and play Who's That Monster Pokemon? Which means, Zed, I'm going to let you take it away because I hear you have plenty for fairies.
Well, yeah, because there's an entire fairy type.
Of course there is.
So I included pictures of primarily the fairies I thought would be the most related. to what we would be talking about.
Ah, yes.
So I think you can see why. We got Clefairy. It's in the name. Clefairy.
It is. And after a long time, it was finally an actual fairy.
I think for it makes, if I think a Pokédex entry is what dances around and very quick to flee from humans, lives in the forest, like to dance in the moonlight.
It
Like
came from the moon.
all the most typical fairy things.
Okay, just say it's like, I know it's called a Clefairy, but is it really a fairy?
Yes, it's a fairy type.
It do have little pink wings.
And it does act, and Clefable does have wings on the back of it. It evolves.
So it is actually. So wait, there were fairy types in the original 150?
No. So originally,
No, it
Clefairy
was
a
normal type before fairies were introduced in 2013.
Okay, I was gonna say because like I did play Pokemon for a little while and I didn't remember.
They went back and retroactively made a lot of these.
They changed several old Pokemon to fairies if it made sense for them to have it.
So wait a minute, they changed normals to fairies because it made sense, but they still didn't change
some of them
Charizard into a dragon type
because it was a flying type.
I don't care. It's a dragon. Charizard
they gave it a mega evolution that made it a dragon type.
So Charizard is a dragon.
The reason they never made it a dragon is because they figured it would be it was unfair to have the first starter type have the second typing of a dragon, which at that time the only thing dragons were weak against was ice type, and there was only one ice type in the game.
It's still a dragon.
And it sucked.
Yeah, like not only that, because it would have been fire dragon, it would easily counter any ice types. So it would effectively been unbeatable.
Its only weakness would have been no, it would have been
pretty much is unbeatable anyway.
No, I mean, as a flying fire type, it's weak against electric, and it's weak against water, and it's weak against rock types. Whereas a fire dragon is weak only against now fairy types, I think.
No, fire resist fairy.
Oh, so would it have any weakness?
Yeah, it would be weak to ground, rock, and dragon.
So ground would have been the only one, and even then that I forget, since it's not flying, it wouldn't have unless they gave it levitate.
Yeah, without flying, ground hits it, so it would be weak to ground, rock still, because fire is weak to rock, and dragon itself.
This all sounds like evidence that it's stupid not to make Charizard a dragon.
Well, they gave it a mega, which fixed that.
You can take it up with Game Freak.
I should, if I cared enough.
But I did try to include mostly the fairy type. I got a few on there. Gardevoir, I thought more elf. I thought that was the closest thing they had to an elf in Pokemon.
There's no direct elf.
The one with the dress.
I could see it as an elf.
The little white coming off of its eye, I thought, okay, well, that's the closest to an ear, and, it's supposed to be graceful, and elves are regarded as graceful. It does sometimes live in forest type.
Though remember, that's mostly Tolkien's influence.
True. The Ribby, that's the little actual fairy that got wings that look like Tinkerbell. I include that one in there because I figured Tinkerbell, that thing. What is the other one? The Floret, I think is the...
Yeah, Floette is the flower one.
Floret is the flower. I thought, okay, well, a lot of the fairies, with the original fairies, are associated with tiny creatures that are associated with nature. So that's why I included that one in there.
Makes sense.
Because I figured, okay, that do seem like... I included Mimikyu because we don't have a good description for fairies. And Mimikyu is literally a Pokemon that we don't see because it has a cloak over it that is in the shape of Pikachu. So I figured the Mimikyu, the one with the look like Pikachu.
Makes sense. Which that one's just weird.
Yeah, I figured that would be a good one for
Goblins?
because a lot of fairies are just weird.
That's true.
No, the two goblins, Impidimp and Morgrim.
Morgrim, yeah.
Morgrim.
Impidimp
Oh,
and Morgrim.
those are the
Yeah,
two
I'm
goblins
guessing
one.
those are the two top ones, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that fits.
They look well, the Impidem, the smaller one, evolved into the Mogrim, and then the Mogrim technically evolved into a bigger version of a goblin. But I figured these two look the most goblin-esque, especially since one is literally a tiny creature.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll hear no arguments
Oh,
from me.
and the mushroom one, I figure again, fairies are associated with nature. I found it interesting. They had a mushroom fairy type.
I can see that. Or I guess you could have associated with the Smurfs.
Oh, there we go. But
Were the Smurfs The Smurfs weren't fairies, right?
no, they were
No, they're just Smurfs.
yeah, woodland creatures. You could
I
call them
never.
fairy folk because they technically was magical woodland creatures.
Okay, what was magical about them?
They
Their whole
existed.
yeah, no, their whole aspect was magical.
Okay, did they actually have any magic powers?
Yes, Gargamel wanted to catch them because in some version, he could use them in his alchemy to make gold.
Yeah, I know why he wanted to catch them. Either make gold or like make it immortal life,
And
or
they did
eat
actually
them or
have magical
whatever.
powers. Papa Smurf could do magic.
Okay, but like, could the others do magic, or was it just implied?
Papa Smurf could go do magic, so it was implied that the Smurfs could learn magic. It just took a long time.
Eh. I'm not gonna lie, I never got into
I
the
think a
Smurfs.
few of them did. Well, here's the magical thing: you have village of almost all boys until Smurfette came along. How did they reproduce? You want to know how? A stork.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, a stork. You know the whole, oh, just wait, a stork will bring the baby along.
So, but wait, there were 3 kids in like the final season, wasn't
Yeah,
there?
they got brought in by a stork.
So, so wait, they weren't Smurfette's kids?
No, they were brought in by a stork.
Okay. All right, so now it's not the stork that's bothering me now. The part that's bothering me is that you got a village full of dudes. You got apparently the first female ever, and she didn't get knocked up?
Not that I know of.
See, that's the most unbelievable part. Though, for all the Smurf fans out there, I'm sorry, I never really got into the show. I could never get past that damn theme song.
Yeah, no, they had because I remember that's how Baby Smurf came along. Was a stork just brought Baby Smurf along, and now we got Baby Smurf.
Oh, I hated that theme song. I'm sorry, I'm having flashbacks to that stupid theme
I'm
song.
trying
Why?
so hard not to say it, not to sing it.
I appreciate. Why did people like the theme song? It was
It was
literally the
catchy.
same bloody word over and over again.
Well, yeah, it was just la. That was the whole thing.
It was stupid. It was so dumb. Okay. Well, so yes, we can see fairies kind of incorporates it, and actually,
Oh,
their looks kind of
I
What?
forgot one thing to add. You haven't brought this up, but most fairy things in the old legends was weak to iron, if I recall correctly.
I think that was a later addition because, like I said, most of them were side characters and just mischievous.
But at one point, they did start develop a weakness to iron. I remember.
Yes, they did.
Fairy
I'm
types
not
are weak to
sure
steel type,
that works. I'm not sure
and
when they got the iron thing.
and fairies for some reason are strong against dragons.
Yeah, I don't think that's part of mythos. Like, why exactly are fairies strong against dragons?
I believe
Because dragons were overpowered before, so they needed a way to mitigate it.
I think the argument was that fairies was magical and it's used because there's always a theme behind why they make one type special against another, and I think there's because again steel being strong against fairies because fairies magical things in some of the legends was weak against iron, so that's where the steel came from. So I think the fairies came from the fact that I think it was because most of the time it's always the small magical characters to beat the dragon, or to help the hero beat the dragon, like the Hobbit. So I think that's where they. I remember it was something about magical creatures being fair, beating dragons a lot of times, or something like that.
Well, okay, so actually, keep the iron statement because that will come up in a little bit. And we'll discuss a possible origin for that because getting back to the fairies' origins, like I was saying, fairy itself, the word fairy was kind of an ambiguous term, and it could really mean any type of small creature and could include such creatures as wisps, goblins, gnomes, elves, pixies, hobgoblins, sprites, spirits, or really any small magical creature. Kind of like how, as we learned in the vampire podcast, that vampire was often used as just a umbrella term for anything representing evil. So fairy was pretty much representing any small, slightly mischievous creature. Now, there are plenty of creatures that are okay. So when it comes to actually trying to figure out the origins of this creature, um, it becomes a little difficult because we have to wonder, like, the creatures are these creatures so similar? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. Okay, so what can be implied from this is the creatures themselves. We should be asking, are they so similar in traits and appearances that they're almost completely indistinguishable, and that's why fairies is a blanket term? Or is it possible that the name could alter depending on the narrator or culture? Could they decide to call them different things depending on what part of the world they am, or perhaps even a translation? I mean, we see this type of thing in the world today from country to country, from state to state, even to city, different terms having different cultural or just basic meanings that you wouldn't think about. Hard to say, but one thing that I think we should kind of focus on, and one of the bigger questions about these things, is their size. Now, there are plenty of creatures who are only a few inches tall or only about a foot tall. Now, one of the big problem is none of them are really humanoid. So we can't really base this on a real creature. And as fairies and elves in particular are supposed to be smart, or at least at times smarter than humans, which I don't know, some humans nowadays that might not be saying much, but let's not get into that, is a little strange to say the least, because the smaller you get, the more simplistic your brain's going to be. The more simplistic it needs to be able to kind of connect. Because despite what you think, you can't really just push all things together and take away empty space and molecules to create and make things smaller. So I apologize to Ant-Man fans, but no, you won't be able to have the same brain capacity if you suddenly shrink down. That's a non-starter. Really, I thought I'd get an argument from you guys on that.
I mean, you clearly don't know how Pym particles work.
I don't think Pym knows how Pym particles works.
He doesn't need to. He found them, so they can work however you want. That's the luxury of finding a new particle.
Yeah, that's the luxury of bullshit and lazy writing.
I mean, pretty much. If I recall, like, I think the Pym particle was originally, he was trying to find a way to shrink people down, or to end world hunger or something like that.
So basically, he found a MacGuffin.
Yeah. No, the Pym particle was always a MacGuffin.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the Speed Force doing whatever it frickin' wants.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Yeah. So that sounds about right. So with that, we have to also ask, human form. Well, could this perhaps be maybe just a little person or a dwarf or something like that? Well, no, that doesn't fit either, because in the stories, this is supposed to be their natural form. This is supposed to be what they are. They're supposed to be naturally this big, and there's no hint of any type of deformity when it comes to these creatures. So their small stature is what they're supposed to be. So in this rare case, in order to really discover and figure out what this origin may be, we may have to actually ignore the physical appearance. Now, why do I say that? Well, it's because as we've been going through these different monsters and creatures, I'm hoping that I've been kind of emphasizing a point. And what this demonstrates is that all stories, or at least the majority of stories, with very few exceptions, are prone to exaggeration. Stories that are already largely unbelievable and fantastic are less inclined to be exaggerated, as they're already interesting and entertaining enough in their natural form that you don't really need to add anything. While other stories that are considerably mild or mildly odd are at a greater risk of being exaggerated for the purpose of entertainment. Therefore, to determine the grain of truth with any myth or legend, the exaggerations must be identified and removed. Now, this is generally achieved by viewing several versions of the same thing or similar story and addressing the elements that are alike and different. If a particular feature is repeated from one interpretation to another, then you can surmise that that one has a greater chance of credibility, where in contrast, a feature seems to be added or only unique to one particular section of the same creature or same story, then it probably was simply added for entertainment. Now, in this case, what if the exaggeration of fairies, goblins, and everything else is actually their appearance? What if the range of physical appearance is because they've never actually had an observed physical appearance in the first place? What if the actual myth is an unseen creature who either helps and hinders? What do you guys think?
Well, if I recall, fairies was always just a catch-all term for magical little folks.
Yeah. Which could
And
encompass anything, even goblins or anything else. And that's the thing. They were never properly described, is what I'm getting at. In fact, many of them were supposed to be invisible or unseen.
yeah.
So I find that kind of interesting. Zed, do you find that kind of interesting?
A little bit.
Right.
So
So
gremlins.
yeah, actually, yes. And that's the thing. So this is where we're getting kind of into maybes here. But here's the maybe. Perhaps the simplistic story has a more simplistic answer. What if the origin is the human desire to not be held accountable? Now, what do I mean by that? Basic human nature, people like to be right and they hate to be wrong. I mean, anyone who tells you, oh, I love being wrong is a liar. Nobody likes being wrong. Everybody hates being wrong. It sucks to be wrong. And the only thing that sucks more than being wrong is having people know you're wrong. We hate to make mistakes, and we hate it when people know that we make mistakes. It all comes back to it. We despise that. So, what do we hate most? When we make a mistake and people know we made a mistake. Now, here's the thing. What do people normally do? Well, if they can, they'll blame someone or something else. And the best thing to blame is something that can't defend itself, something that can't come out and say, no, that's not true, or something that can point it back at you. For instance, we've seen this in little children. Children can often blame imaginary friends or pets on something they did because, well, what is the imaginary friend going to come forth and say, Timmy did it? Or is the pet going to start talking in human talk just to say, hey, I didn't do anything. The kid peed on the rug. No, of course not. I mean, heck, we've seen some parents, they'll spill a bowl and they'll basically frame their toddler who can't yet talk to defend themselves. I mean, come on, it's true. So, question is, could adults be doing the same thing?
Well,
I mean, fairy Sorry, what?
No, what I'm hearing is
Oh,
because fairy folks are supposed to be small, little, invisible creatures that may help or hinder you, and gremlins are small, little creatures that break things, and they was around during World War II. I'm taking from this that gremlins are real, and that all my problems are attributed to gremlins.
You know what? Oddly enough, you saying that actually fits the rest of this narrative,
Why?
so I'm going to continue it.
It's all clicking now. All my problems
Because
of gremlins.
Dear God.
the reason, Zed, hold on. How did you put that picture together so damn fast?
Look, this was one of the ideas I was working off of, and this is all the proof I needed.
Did you have this just on standby for when you... Why do you... Okay, wait. No. It still fits, so we're going to talk about this later, but it still fits because fairy legends are old, and in a time when superstition could be as credible as science, maybe, and, people could believe that a man in a toga threw thunderbolts down if he was pissed off. Is it also possible that they believed in small invisible creatures? Therefore, could people in an attempt to exert blame from things they did start blaming magical small creatures that worked unseen? Could the entire fairy legend just basically be people trying to pass blame off?
I think we gotta let a lot of people out there insane asylums. That's what I'm hearing. I think maybe Crazy Joey living in the insane asylum was a little bit right when he said the goblins killed his family. I think
Shadow, I think you're literally missing the point of what I'm trying to say about this. Zed, do you see what I'm saying?
So the gremlins really did eat my homework.
Oh dear God.
Zed, you know I'm not saying this. Please help me here.
You want me to help you from this?
Not
You
from
see the same thing I see right now.
Not from Shadow or Fox, but do you see my point that I'm trying to make?
Psychiatrist told me the little voices and the little people in the room were just all in my head, but I knew I was right.
Okay, Zed, I'm going to try to talk to you exclusively right now for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Zed, so my point is, what if this whole notion of small, unseen creatures causing either harm or mischief came from humans simply not wanting to take accountability for things happening around them?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right? Because, we've had moments where we put something somewhere and we're like, I swear I didn't put it there. Someone must have moved it. Things like that. And then originally blaming small creatures until it became its own mythos.
So,
yeah.
Working off of this logic.
Oh, no.
Every time I lose a sock,
Why are we still letting him
it goes
speak?
to Narnia.
Okay,
Which means the
problem...
gremlins live
What?
there.
Okay, there is an actual myth about this, so I'm kind of torn here.
It's all backed up by science now.
Didn't South Park do this same episode?
They did. I think they did. Yeah, with the little the elves steal the socks, and they're like, okay, we steal a bunch of socks, okay, and then we sell the socks, okay, and then somehow we make money. And they only steal one sock, so you would lose a pair.
Why are you giving credit to a South Park episode that was clearly making fun? Wasn't that about capitalism?
Yes.
How are we? Gnomes are not stealing your socks, Shadow R. Fox.
No, it's the gremlins.
Okay, first of all, in the myth, in the stories, gremlins sabotage planes. They didn't steal your socks. If you're gonna make nonsensical myth jokes, at least get the myth right.
Well, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. Because
crap.
what's been in the news lately, but planes been having a lot of trouble lately. I think the gremlins are making a comeback. Maybe Boeing doesn't have a problem with their whole safety and manufacturing. It's gremlins.
Or their hiring process where they don't hire people who are qualified.
No gremlins. That makes the most sense.
You know, you should post that to Boeing or to some of the woke liberals. I bet they'd go for it.
I should. They actually probably would give me a cash prize that I figure out the problem with all their planes. Ah, there's the problem. We had gremlin. You can't see it. It's invisible, but it'll be $50. I got rid of it for you.
Zed, I don't know what to do. Help me.
You want me to help you with this?
Please, I don't know what to do here. Everything I say just makes it worse.
Just scream.
I'm not screaming. Are you out of your mind?
Yes.
Okay. Shadow R Fox, have fun with your Boeing theory, but back to reality. It seems more probable that maybe the stories of these tiny creatures being helpful or hindrance was just people who couldn't explain how certain things happen or didn't want to take accountability for things that happened. Seems more logical than gremlins stealing socks to sabotage planes.
But then how did the shoemaker get all the shoes?
He sleepwalked. I'm actually amazed I thought of that so quickly. Now, that's my thought. However, there have been other explanations. Some people actually thought that the fairies were a kind of metaphor for traveling nomads. Because, back in older times, there wasn't a lot of traveling done. Most people would never even venture 100 miles from where they lived. So, foreigners coming in with foreign concepts and everything else. And it could be seen as allegory for people with different brands. And that's actually where you mentioned fairies being weak to iron. Some people actually think that ancient conflicts was a basis of that, with the two clashings of iron versus bronze, with the iron becoming more superior and being able to beat the
sea people.
Yeah. And able to beat out the bronze, which was older seen, where they were seen as more industrialization. So in a way, industrial over nature. Though to be fair, I wouldn't say the people who casted bronze swords were particularly nature bound, but like I said, it seems like a fairly weak explanation, but it is one that should be considered. There's also the symbolic meaning of iron and its overall culture, how it does, again, represent that kind of industrialization. And, oftentimes iron was seen as a magical craft, so people thought it had magical properties and could affect others. Two of the fun theories that I thought of, which are recent theories, was that iron has magnetic properties, and fairies being creatures of energy, the iron interfered with their natural electromagnetic force and therefore disrupted their very existence, which I thought was kind of fun. The other is that iron has to be taken from the ground and worked, and because it was basically stolen earth or something robbed from the earth, it bothered the nature-loving fairies, which was interesting. One final one that I'll mention is Pliny the Elder, who was a Roman naturalist, mentioned using iron nails from a tomb to repel spirits. Which, so they believed it could ward off evil. I'm not completely sure why iron from a tomb would do it. I guess invoked with the magic of the dead or the spirit of the dead. And iron horseshoes would also work, which is how the whole iron horseshoe going over became part of it. So, believe it or not, good point for that, but it's not very clear where the fairies' aversion to iron came from. More than likely, that was kind of addition with stories as fairies became more and more popular and started to take more and more center stage instead of being regulated to simply side characters. Because J.R.R. Tolkien doesn't have fairies in it, and the elves certainly aren't particularly weak to iron. So that's probably in later stories.
Did he not have elves? I mean, fairies?
I do not recall fairies in J.R. Tolkien stories. Unless they were in the Silmarillion, which I have not read.
Oh, fairies
Had
was a
angels.
name for hobbit. I mean, the fairies was a name the hobbit used for elves.
Oh, really?
Yes, the hobbits sometimes use fairy as a name for elves.
Oh, right. He called them the fairy folk.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot about that.
Okay, because I'm like, I know that I've heard the term fairy in Lord of the Rings before.
Yeah, fairy folk, but they're clearly elves. They're not really supposed to be fairies
Yes.
in the general term. So, okay, yeah, no, you're right. They called them the fairy folk. I forgot about that. I was thinking for a second, God, do I need to go back and read The Hobbit? It's like, no, I remember that. But so, yeah, but fairies as we know it were not really in The Hobbit. So, non-starter on that one. Maybe that's why they haven't been. So I couldn't really tell you where the iron lore came from. If you have a better explanation, like feel free. I think it was just kind of added in to give them kind of a weakness as they became more prominent.
I don't know. Can ChatGPT give me a picture of Iron Man fighting fairies fast enough to explain where where fairies' weakness to iron came from?
Couldn't you just use the labyrinth thing where you have the goblins spraying them with bug spray? Does anyone remember that scene?
Mm.
Well, I guess Zed, do you want to see Iron Man killing a bunch of fairies?
Sure, why not?
Zed, Shadow R Fox, while you're looking up that nonsense, what do you like real talk, what do you think of the possible fairies just being people not wanting to take accountability for things that just kind of happen?
I mean, yeah, that's kind of the same thing with like the boogeyman and stuff like that. Whereas with the boogeyman, they were using it as a way to scare kids, as a catch-all to scare kids. But fairies and magical folks, I mean, since literally fairies, magical folks, elves, goblins are literally just used to refer to magical creature, which doesn't have a good identifier.
Right. Because that's what I noticed when you start literally looking at the stories. I mean, half of them were never seen by the protagonist, so they just kind of did stuff. And like looking at the mythos, like it would kind of make sense.
Or we could go the full Pierre Capaldi Doctor Who route and say that the fairies are a species of invisible creatures who um
Have developed perfect hiding.
yeah, the perfect hiding creatures, so that way we can't find them and can't see them.
That was a creepy episode.
That was a strange episode. I still don't know if the if those creatures were real or just the doctor messing with himself.
Right? I genuinely don't know about that. Like, it was weird. It was the creepy atmosphere was great, but God, that was a weird episode. Especially with the dream and everything. Like, though that does kind of screw up the continuity they did with the Timeless Child, which still ticks me off. The Timeless Child, not the continuity of that. Because I swear, whoever came with the Timeless Child, I don't know why they did that. That was a stupid idea. But sorry, Doctor Who stuff again. Is your GT not giving you the Iron Man thing?
It didn't want to give me the Iron Man because it was an actual copyright image.
Ah, got it.
And yeah, ChatGPT got issues with that, but the good news is Grok did not have an issue with that. So
Oh dear God.
so we'll get something. We will get
Okay.
something, but we won't get ChatGPT. But we will get some nightmare fuel.
Okay, good, because that's all I really had to do with what?
What?
Because I don't have much else with fairies, so Okay, and with that nightmare fuel, I think that will cover
The
this
one in the middle have
episode of
Ratchet's head.
Yeah, it messed up.
That's Ratchet's head from Ratchet and Clank.
Wait,
Isn't Iron
It
Man
looks just like
backwards?
it. Unless I just can't tell.
Yeah, his chest
eyes.
piece is backward.
And yeah, no, he just added a light on the back of it for reasons.
Chest plate. Okay. And that will do it for our episode of Fairies. Thank you all for joining us for this. Where next time, I don't even know what's next. My mind's just stuck on whatever image Edward Fox brought in and thinking about how he's going to tell Boeing that their planes are being damaged by gremlins.
I'll probably get cast for war for that.
You probably will. That's the sad part.
Here we was going to just re-examine our planes and put better safety measure in, but now we don't have to do that. We just gotta pay you $50 per plane so you can say, "Yep, no gremlins here."
So how exactly going to sell this since you don't know what gremlins are like?
Well, they don't know either because they're invisible.
He's got you there.
So you're just going to tell them that you can see them and that's all that needs to be done.
Well, yeah.
Can you at least come up with some bullshit device that allows you to see them?
I mean, I got a remote, so yeah, I could probably put gremlin detector on it or something.
Well, why not? It's good enough for the doctor. And with that, I will hope to see you all next time when we cover either another Angel podcast or another Monster podcast, or heck, we might even do a degenerate discussion about something. So tune in next time to find out.
See ya.
And remember, if you have any interest in looking at these monsters a little deeper, you can always check out the book Probable, Possible, Plausible, an Explanatory Guide to Monsters and Myth.
It's always going to be in the description.
Have a good one.
See ya.
Au revoir.